Alright, I'm back with another Destiny 2 video, as how could I not make another one after that state of the game? I'm not going to go through all the specific things again, as I mostly did that yesterday, but today I kind of wanted to dig into the why of everything. Why was there so much bad news, namely that PvP and Gambit are going to continue to be left behind. Gambit is essentially dead. PvP remains on something akin to life support, and the good news there was a lot of vague things about storytelling and changing seasonal mechanics and, favoriting shaders, and there's, some good things, but relatively minor compared to, the overall health of the game, which is kind of what the state of the game is supposed to be talking about. We know there's going to be a lot of reveals in the final shape showcase, but that kind of thing is usually for here's, the plot and the enemies and your new subclass or whatever. It's showing off that kind of stuff, or seasonal things, or, maybe some discussions of what happens after final shape with seasonal stuff. But the health of the game, the core of the game stuff is for the state of the game. I think there are two major reasons as to why what's happening with Destiny is happening. I do not work at Bungie. I'm not basing this on insider info. A lot of this just feels like common sense to me. And it's things that Bungie will not or cannot say outright in the state of the game. So you just have things like, yeah, we hear you, but we're not really going to do anything or change anything. And then you're like, what? Why? Why would you not? And then there are answers to that. So there are two things: monetization and other projects. These have all been talked about before, but after the state of the game, I want to put it kind of in more context. The monetization piece is pretty clear to see. I think a lot of this stems from the decision to go free-to-play with Destiny 2. And the idea behind free-to-play was pretty obvious. A lot of games were going free-to-play back then, usually PvP-only games, Apex, Call of Duty, whatever. They're selling you a battle pass, things like that. But Destiny wanted the base game to be free. And that ended up being, at first, very, very good, because you had essentially 2 full years of content. But that changed. Almost all the stuff that you had for free was vaulted. They removed all of that. They replaced it with a much shorter onboarding new light introductory quest that got boosted a little over time, but it was still far from what you originally got as free-to-play. The main free-to-play draws became the ritual playlists and a couple of raids and a dungeon, and then everything else was still sold piecemeal. But the point there is that the ritual playlists are free, and putting resources into new maps for PvP, new maps for Gambit, even something like the ritual armor sets, all of that is not able to be sold. They say in the state of the game itself that if you invest more in that, you are diverting resources away from exotic quests, seasonal PvE content, all of that stuff. That is all sold. That is all sold for $10 a season and is part of the ongoing, monetization of the game that occurs all year round. The counter argument to this is that if you are going to do a free-to-play game, you need to continually add significant things to the free-to-play portion, or even in a paid game, in order to maintain the health of the player base, you still need to invest in other areas of the game. It is wild to me that Destiny 2 has 30 to 40% of its entire player base, hundreds of thousands of people, still playing PvP. And when you just routinely show that you are neglecting that significant portion of the population, you get where we are today. And after years and years and years of being like, you guys aren't investing anything in PvP. We went years without any maps. We have upgraded to 1 new map a year, some reprise maps, many of which probably shouldn't have been deleted in the first place. And that is not changing. That is what the state of the game said. that is not going to change in any meaningful capacity because it would take resources away from other things that are paid. If the game was not free to play and they were still trying to sell Destiny 2 at the store, those PvP and Gambit maps and all that stuff would be part of a package they were trying to sell. If the entire thing became, a bundle where it's the first 3 expansions and stuff like that sold with the original Destiny 2, that would be something that is a core part of that still has a price tag on it. But they can't do that anymore. You can't sell base Destiny 2 because all of base Destiny 2 was deleted, minus the destinations where there are no longer story things on them. So you have this weird scenario where you wanted your game to be free to play to open up the player population, but you deleted most of the free things, and you feel like you cannot add any more free things because you are pursuing monetization at all costs. That I kind of touched on yesterday, and that is a big part of why some things are invested in and some things are not. The other part of this is other projects. And the most obvious example here is Marathon. Marathon, we know, took large chunks and very significant figures of the PvP team and moved them over to Marathon, which will be a live service, PvP, v kind of E sometimes, extraction shooter. This is Bungie reviving a very old IP, turning it into something else entirely, and trying to compete in a space that has some like mid-range successes from smaller companies. It's Tarkov and all that stuff, and the Dr. Disrespect NFT one, and trying to do like a AAA take on it. But the problem is that is directly taking away resources from Destiny. And even though the company has grown significantly since the early days of Destiny 2, that project and other projects that we don't know about, there are at least 2 more incubated projects going on. We don't know if anything else will make it to production, but I am willing to bet almost all of those are live. Almost all of them will have some sort of PvP component. And so that feels like what is being significantly invested in, especially when they look at Destiny and they still have a few 100,000 people playing PvP, neglecting it this badly. So why divert resources toward a PvP population that is not really leaving necessarily, and they can't sell the stuff they would be adding to PvP? It is not a surprise that they're not talking about this in the state of the game, but it is a reality. And when they were bought by Sony, they essentially sold themselves based on the idea that they themselves would produce a number of live games for Sony. They're not exclusive games. Destiny's not going exclusive. Marathon's not exclusive. They have a stipulation where everything has to be multi-platform, but Sony will be raking in money from these because Sony does not have very many, really any, significant live service offerings. Bungie was meant to change that, both in the terms of the titles they make, but they are also spending some amount of time, teaching existing developers within Sony how to do more live things. So the reason Sony bought Bungie is not just to get that, Destiny 2 cash. It's for all Bungie's future games. It's for what Bungie can teach Sony developers. But the end result of that is Destiny becomes less of a priority. You can scale up the studio as a whole, but since you have 3-4 other projects people are working on, including what has to be a very significant amount of people, especially PvP-focused people working on Marathon, that is why you no longer have the kind of expansions that we used to have where it's like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 PvP maps, 14 exotics, like all of the stuff that used to be these kind of huge delivery drops has been either reduced, eliminated, or broken into seasonal content, and then some stuff has just pretty much ceased to exist altogether. And part of this feels like broken promises because for so long they're like, no, we're going to do more investment in PvP, and like, yeah, more things with Gambit are coming, but like when it arrives to time, it's like, your new PvP thing is 1 map in these 2 modes, and your new Gambit thing is undeleting a map we deleted. And that does not feel good. the reality is I don't see this changing very much. Even if Destiny 2 scales back and it starts losing player population, which again is not really happening to a significant degree yet. As I said, Lightfall just hit a peak player count bigger than anything in the lifespan of the game, at least on Steam. It really went badly after that because nobody liked Lightfall for the most part, but interest in the game is still rising. I think Bungie is being very risky here because Destiny 2 still has a healthy player population and is still, against all odds, a popular franchise that people enjoy. And the reason anyone's mad about this in the first place is because this is a game they like and they want to see it better and they want to see more stuff added to it. And that's why everyone's kind of, feeling a little betrayed, I guess, by this. But they're making a bet that all these other projects they're making are going to, succeed. That's, what anyone hopes when they're making a project, but kind of offset whatever losses they may end up taking from scaling Destiny down. And that really means there's a lot riding on these other projects. If they launch Marathon and it doesn't do what they want, and they've spent years and years taking away resources from Destiny to do that, it will be a risk that really did not pay off. And it really is hard to see anything significant changing when, there's all the Twitter protests and Reddit protests in the world, and yet player count is not utterly crashing. Like, it is hitting new highs, and the lows are still higher than the old baseline lows used to be. This is still a series that is amassing more players in time. And until that changes, it is not super surprising that Bungie will A, stick to not maxing out the entire studio to, go nuts with Destiny, and B, focus on things that are actually earning money. I keep thinking about the Microsoft document that was disclosed in the Activision case, where they were looking at reacquiring Bungie, and they talked about their high burn rate. And burn rate is like burning through cash very quickly, and it is very expensive to run a live service that has both PvP elements and so much PvE content you deliver. I cannot think of another game that delivers this much PvE content with this much regularity that isn't like Genshin Impact or Final Fantasy XIV, and even then, I don't know. So that is a significant factor here. And I don't think people should be rooting for Marathon to fail. I think that is very petty. I think there are a lot of good people working on Marathon. I think it is totally normal for a studio to want to start working on other things after running a game for a decade. If Bungie didn't do that, we would be in year 20-something of Bungie working on Halo, which might be better for Halo, but Destiny would have never existed. And I personally have been way more into Destiny over the course of my life than I was Halo, even if Halo is like an all-time classic. And the problem is when you do these other things and you're still trying to maintain the thing you already have, your priorities get split in a way that can be very uncomfortable. And if your studio philosophy is, we're listening, we're taking feedback, and then you turn around and be like, we know we the most requested thing we get is new PvP maps. Here's why we're not doing it. And the explanation is it takes away from things that are monetizable, and they're working on some other totally separate game that Destiny players aren't necessarily going to play. Neither of which they said outright. It's just this is how you have to read into it because it's the reality of the situation. I don't know what the answer here is. It feels very hostile right now between the community and developers. The developers don't really want to talk online anymore outside of these, official communications, because for every 1,000 pieces of normal feedback, normal complaints, you have 5 people, really harassing developers and being totally annoying, if not outright dangerously hostile. And then every so often you have a true psychopath who stalks DMG like in real life. And then on the other side, you have the fan base where just over and over and over again, they're hoping Bungie will deliver on like the highest requested things, and it just never seems like they get it. And especially in recent years, they don't really seem to be acknowledging some of the biggest mistakes that the game has made. Like I said, I was shocked that there was literally nothing about the new player experience in Destiny outside of like, here's what currencies do, and like maybe here's a higher way to play with your higher level friends. Maybe they're saving that for post final shape, but to not even mention it, when I would say that is the single biggest problem in the game. Not PvP, not Gambit, but new player onboarding is probably the worst I've ever seen in a game of this size. Some of that has to do with the nature of it being live and so many things being deleted, but like there are still better ways to go about this than what is currently happening, with whether that's the way they package things together, what content is actually free. And there was nothing. There was nothing about like the single biggest problem with the game. And then the most requested thing by far has been a greater focus on PvP, delivering actual meaningful new content. And somehow that always just ends up being, you know, one or two new modes, and here's a couple maps we deleted, and here's a possibly worse version of a Destiny 1 map, and then new trials of Osiris armor and 2 new Iron Banner guns. Like something, it's like they're doing something, but even when they do something, it's A, not enough, and B, it's like not even the right thing a lot of the time. Like they did the whole competitive division thing, and that has been like kind of very bad. They haven't really figured out the ladder. Like you're gaining tiny amounts of points compared to losing tons of points. They've had to rework Trials of Osiris, you know, rules and cards like 50 times at this point. It never quite seems like it lands where it needs to. And yet, like, the base is there. People fundamentally like the physical act of playing PvP, and they just wish there was more invested into it. The Gambit thing is just very sad because, you know, Gambit became kind of a meme for a while, but Gambit actually ended up in a very good place. And with more investment, it feels like it could have been, you know, a genuinely more interesting, more engaging mode. And it's very frustrating to hear them be like, you know, there's not that much engagement in Gambit, so there's not really a reason to invest all that much more into it. It's like, yes, it's a circle. There's no engagement because you haven't invested anything into it, and you're not investing anything into it because there's not enough engagement. Like, it's enough to make you go insane. But I'm going down that rabbit hole again. But fundamentally, all of this comes down to things that like Bungie can't say. And it has to do with money. They need to make Destiny both pay for itself and profit, but also now profit enough to fund all these other games. I agree with everyone that's said they've taken this way too far in terms of what they monetize, how much they monetize it, how much paid content is being made, either through, you know, what's free to play, what's not, or through Eververse directly, refusing to make 5-year-old expansions free at this point, half deleting them and still selling the pieces. That is all too far. I do not begrudge Bungie trying to build new games. It just feels bad when that comes at the expense of what is still a very successful, highly played game, that it just feels like bits and pieces of it are being chopped off to feed these other things and nothing is replacing it. I've seen a lot of comments about like, well, why don't they just hire more people? And like, I probably said that in the past too, but there are limits to what that can do. You can't just add another 400 people and then suddenly Destiny is, you know, 40% bigger and has 40 more content. Like that's not how it works really, but I do wish there was more stuff about filling gaps. If you move your entire PvP team essentially over to Marathon, I would invest, you know, I'm not telling you to hire hundreds and hundreds of people, but like someone who is building maps for Destiny PvP, like hire that team. It doesn't have to be you're doubling the size of the studio to support Destiny, but filling in those gaps that you are moving elsewhere and finding new talent to raise up if your PvP lead is now on Marathon, like raise other people up, allow them to flourish in these other spaces where they are needed. That just does not seem to be happening on the PvP side. On the PvE side, they are delivering more content than they have since any point, since the Opulence days. Probably even more than that if you really add it all up. So that part they kind of have down to a science, but that's because that's the part they sell, and everything else has not been a priority. So I think that's where we are and how we got there. And well, the specifics of why this decision was made compared to this decision and what's incubating and what's going to make it out, that is stuff we can't really know. It just feels like there's not a real answer here. And especially after that state of the game, when they have indicated that this will just essentially be how it is for the foreseeable future, it doesn't really even feel like there's hope anymore. Like 3 days ago, I published a video like, the year of the final shape, is it finally time to like invest more in PvP and Gambit? Like, because it's this intermediate year between final shape and the next expansion where story can take a back seat. Maybe they invest in that more. That died. That died with the state of the game. I have no faith that will happen. Don't think there's anything in the final shape that will indicate any further investments in those areas of the game. If there was, they would have said that in the state of the game, but all they said in state of the game was like, stay tuned for the new seasonal mechanics and final shape and stuff like that, which is not the same thing. So if you are okay playing PvP in its current form and can handle one new map a year and you just like playing it for its own sake, that's great. But if you feel like you don't want to invest in PvP because Bungie is not investing in PvP, or in turn investing in you as a player, even if you're someone who is buying the PvE seasons and you just want some PvP content to fulfill that part of your interest in the game, I don't blame you. If you feel that way, that is a very reasonable thing to feel at this point, and especially after it was just laid out pretty plainly. All the Gambit mains out there, nothing to say. Like, you're not getting anything, essentially. I'm sorry. But yeah, I'm not going to say Destiny's dying, blah, blah, blah. Like, the player count, the engagement is still too high to make any declaration like that. I do think the relationship between the community and the developers is badly, badly damaged. And you can't fix that from the community side, really. Like, there are community leaders and whatever, like, but it kind of has to be a unified Bungie, olive branch, bridge, whatever, because Bungie communicates through like focus points, like community management, state of the games, TWABs, showcases. Whereas fans aren't going to like come together and create one document that's like listing their demands for the game. It's like this giant chorus that's just always yelling and yelling, yelling. And usually they're yelling different things. Although after yesterday's state of the game, everyone is kind of yelling the same thing. But it just doesn't seem to me like Bungie is trying to build those bridges in the way they used to. And I think they're just tired. They're tired of all the arguing and the complaining and some very real threats that they've gotten. Even if it's a fraction of the player base, like those kinds of things are still obviously potentially scary. And that's kind of all it takes. But I don't see how that's a sustainable relationship to have with a community. And I don't like it's one thing to not speak to them, speak to them in very focused bits and not really be as open with communication, but because they're doing that. Like, the state of the game is open communication. It's just really wild to see it be like, this is what we know, this is what you want, and we're not doing it. That is the thing that feels the weirdest here and why everybody is so upset. And I think we know the reasons. I just don't know what really happens from here. I think we're not going to know more. I think we know what's going to happen, through the final shape. We're going to have 2 more seasons. They're going to be very similar to this season. Final shape will happen. There will be a conclusive ending, and then it's kind of like mystery mode. Like, will there be a hard reset, a soft reset, you know, different new player onboarding? Like, what is going to happen next? That is when we can kind of restart this conversation over again. Although now I still, if we are doing that, it still doesn't seem like it's going to really have anything to do with PvP. And who knows if Gambit will even exist by that point. Then the other point in time we have to look at is Marathon. And when that comes out, how that's received, if that does potentially satisfy a bunch of Destiny PvP players and they move over to Marathon, Bungie certainly wouldn't mind that. And if they get a great new PvP game to play, great. But that's like kind of best case dream scenario, and who knows when it'll happen. And Marathon's probably not coming out until 2025 plus at this point, so who knows. I don't really have advice here. If you're not enjoying the game, if you don't like the direction it's going, don't play it. I have not really been playing it very much at all. I did as much seasonal stuff as I could at the beginning before these other games came out, but this is a crazy year. There are way too many other games demanding my time, and in combination with how kind of stale things have felt in all aspects of the game in many regards, even with all the PvE content now, it just hasn't been a priority for me in a way I've never really experienced since Curse of Osiris. And I don't know if that'll change if my schedule frees up more in the next 2 seasons, maybe, but I mean, we have just other massive games coming, Starfield, Spider-Man, there's a million. I don't know what the future holds. It is very hard to just let go of this series completely when it's something we've devoted 9 or 10 years of our lives to, and when it's not ending. Like, if the final shape was the end, I think we could be like, okay, this is, we're ending at this point. It's time to move on to other projects, to Marathon within Bungie's family, to other live games, whatever. But it's not ending. They're trying to keep it going essentially forever. And whether they're able to engage players or not is the ultimate question. And it seems like their current direction keeps going down and down and down and down in terms of community sentiment. Will it go down in terms of player numbers in a significant way? I guess we'll see. But yeah, so that's where we are. That's why I think about the whole situation. And it's not great, but it's also kind of unavoidable. But all right, well, let me know what you think in the comments. And I don't know how long I keep talking about this. I'm about to go on vacation next week, midweek, but might get back to Remnant, might create a Baldur's Gate character and play for a couple hours until I find some other gaming stuff I have to do, like potential review copies of potential upcoming enormous games. But yeah. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you soon. Take care.